In this demonstration, we will create the main view model of the Friend Organizer application. We will also implement the iNotify property changed interface to notify the data binding about changes of properties of the main view model. Then we will set the data context of the main window. We will assign a main view model instance. Finally, we will define the user interface in the main window where we bind to the properties of the main view model. Let's switch to Visual Studio and let's start with the main view model. Let's add a new folder to our UI project and let's call that new folder View Model. Let's add a class to that folder, and as we want to create a view model for the main window, we create the class Main View Model. Let's make the class public and let's add a property of type observable collection of friend that we call friends. I need a using for system collections object model and I need a using for friend organizer model. Let's remove the other usings that I have here. The observable collection is a collection that notifies the data binding when the collection has changed. So when you right click on it and you say go to definition, you can see that the collection implements the interface iNotify collection changed. This is important for the data binding when you add or remove items. Now let's create a constructor in the main view model and let's initialize that friends property with a new observable collection. Now in our main view model, I also create a load method where I want to load my friends. You know where I can get the friends from. We have already implemented that friend data service, and we have an interface iFriend data service. So we can go to our main view model and we can take an iFriend data service as constructor parameter. Let's add a using directive for Friend Organizer UI data and let's call that parameter friend data service. And I save it in a field that I call friend data service with an underscore. Now I can implement the load method by using the data service. I can just get the friends by calling the getAll method on the data service. Then I make a for each loop and I say for each friend in friends and I add each friend to my observable collection. To ensure that the load method can be called multiple times, I call the clear method on my observable collection so that I don't have duplicates if the load method is called twice. Now let's scroll down a bit. Beside the friends property, we also need a selected friend property. So let's just type in prop full and let's press the tab key 2 times and I get a property. The property should be of type friend. The backing field is called underscore selected friend. And the property itself is called selected friend. Let's just cut the private field here and let's move it to the top of the class where it should be. Now, when the selected friend property is set, we need to notify the data binding that it has changed. So we need to raise a property change event in the setter. That's the next thing that we do. When the selected friend property has changed, we need to notify the data bindings about the change so that they can update the UI elements accordingly. To notify the data bindings, we need to implement the interface iNotify property changed on our main view model. To do this, we need the namespace system component model and then we can implement this interface. As you can see, the interface has just this property changed event. We need to raise this event from the setter of our selected friend property. But as we will have more properties in the future, I will just create a helper method to raise the event. So here we can define a private void method that we call onPropertyChanged. As a parameter, we want to have the name of the changed property. Inside of this method, we grab the property changed event, we check if it's not null, and then we raise the event by calling the invoke method. The sender is our main view model and we need to specify property changed event args that contain the changed property name. We have that already as a parameter, so we can just pass it in. Now our little helper method is done and we can call it from the setter of our selected friend property. So here I can just say onPropertyChanged for the selected friend property. Instead of using a string, I can also use the name_of keyword that has been introduced with C#6. But there is even a better approach. We can make the property name parameter on our onPropertyChanged method optional. Then we can define on the parameter the caller member name attribute. This attribute comes from the namespace System Runtime Compiler Services. Now we can call the onPropertyChanged method without a parameter. Then the compiler will automatically pass in the member name of the caller. In this case, the member name of the caller is selectedFriend. Exactly what we want, the property name. Now we are done with the main view model. But as we need the property changed event in different view models throughout this course, I want to put it into a base class, including this onPropertyChanged helper method. So let's scroll down a bit and let's create here another class that I call viewModelBase. And on this class, I implement iNotifyPropertyChanged. Now I can just cut this onPropertyChanged method and I paste it into the viewModelBase class. As I want to use the method from subclasses, I make it protected. I also want to allow subclasses to override it, so let's make it also virtual. Now we can scroll up to the main viewModel class definition and we can just replace iNotifyPropertyChanged with our viewModelBase class. We also don't need the property_changed event anymore in the main viewModel, as it is defined in the viewModelBase class. Now we call in the setter of our selectedFriend property the onPropertyChanged method of the viewModelBase class. Now let's move the viewModelBase class to another file. So I just place the cursor behind the class name and I press Ctrl-. Then I can move the type to a file viewModelBase.cs. I hit enter and I look into the Solution Explorer and here we go. We have a separate file with our new viewModelBase class and we have here the main viewModel that is now complete. The next step is now to assign a main viewModel instance to the data context property of our main window. In the previous clip, we have implemented the main viewModel class. Now we need to assign an instance of that class to the data context of the main window. So let's go to the code behind file of the main window. Let's just remove these unnecessary usings here and let's also get rid of that comment. On the main Windows constructor, I just define a parameter of type main_viewModel and I give the parameter the name viewModel. Now I can assign that viewModel to the data context property of the main window. But the problem is, we need to call the load method on the main viewModel so that the friends get loaded. Calling the load method inside of the constructor is a bad idea. The constructor should just initialize the object. It should not hit a database or call a web service. So instead of calling the load method directly here, we should call it inside of the loaded event handler for the main window. So before we assign the viewModel to the data context, let's just store it in a field. And then let's use that field for the data context assignment, and we can use that field here in the loaded event handler to call the load method on the main viewModel. That's it. Now we are done and we have assigned a new main viewModel instance to the data context of the main window. Now let's implement the user interface and let's bind the UI elements to the viewModel.